Hey there, everyone. It is Sober Steve, the podcast guy, and I am so excited to share this tune up with you today because it was a big moment for me. I have been podcast coaching now for about 6 months. And while I know I've been having success and my clients have successfully been launching, growing, and monetizing their own podcasts, part of being a podcasting badass is knowing that to be the best yourself that you possibly can be, you also have to keep growing and learning. And one of those ways I was growing and learning was following and enrolling in a podcast growth coach certification program with one of my podcasting mentors, Adam. And it was an amazing course that expanded my knowledge from the already being pretty awesome at being able to coach people through podcasting issues that they have, especially around mindset, using my IFC coaching skills I'm learning through Thriving Coach Academy, but then also combining them with his know-how because he's been doing this for even longer than I have. And he's had a successful business and made so many people grow their shows to astronomical levels. And so getting to learn the skills from him as well as the coaching tools from my other program, I'm combining them into one hell of a podcast coaching program myself. And as I'm sure you'll figure once you hear how well this tune-up went, I passed with flying colors. I hope you enjoy this episode and make sure you follow us so that you get another one when it comes out next Monday. Hey there, everyone. It's Steve here with Marge. Welcome, Marge. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Steve. I'm very excited to be here today.
Yes, and I am very excited to help you with your podcast. So why don't you start by introducing yourself and what your podcast is?
Yes. Well, as you mentioned, my name is Marge, and I'm the host of a show called Bite Me, the show about edibles. And that is a weekly podcast where I essentially talk about edibles, not surprisingly, but I do solo episodes where I often take a recipe and walk listeners through that infused recipe, or I have guests on my show as well from all different aspects of the edibles and cannabis space where we can all learn together from their knowledge and expertise.
Yeah, that is excellent. And I love that Adam wanted to challenge me being sober Steve with the edibles podcast. But I was like, it's okay, cool. I do have experience with edibles. So
excellent. That's great.
I have maybe too much, one might argue. So I think that I can certainly help you with not only that, but also looking at your show and everything. I had some ideas of ways to apply the tools that like he showed me that worked for me, that are working with my other clients. So I think this will be very exciting. So with your show, one of the things that we were talking about, or I saw in your form, is that you were interested in the organic discoverability for people to be able to find your show without having to necessarily put all of your eggs in the social media and paid advertising basket, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Social media is not generally too friendly to the cannabis community. So if I can avoid it, I will.
Yeah. And I can understand with paid advertising as well, because I learned with this podcast, even because I have the name badass in my title, I can't advertise on a lot of platforms. Right. So I know like a lot of them will have their standards and policies and procedures and all of that. So I can see how difficult that would be. And I definitely think that there are some ways that we can help with that. With your title, one thing I wanted to talk about, I love the title, first of all, because like when you say Bite Me, it's like the show about edibles. I love it. And even you have pretty good like search engine optimization in the apps as well when I was searching, because like when I searched for edibles, like your episode with Chris Fortes was like the very first thing to show up searching edibles, period. Really? And in the top results. And then under shows, yours was the second show after like one that's like from a magazine. So I was impressed right off the bat with like what the search engine optimization that you have already when you're looking specifically for edibles. But I think that after like listening to your podcast, it's more than just about like, because it's the other podcast that I found that was like kind of like also showed up high was about everything edible and marijuana related and cannabis related. And it was kind of many podcasters fall into the trap of, oh, my show will be about everything in this one thing that I love, while yours seems a little more nuanced in the way that you talk about edibles, correct?
Yes, I would say it's definitely, I mean, I talk about a few things more generally cannabis related, but it is very niche down to the edible space and people who are making them and eating them.
Yeah. And I love that. And so I feel that I noticed in your art, you actually have what I learned that the term was for the title extension in your podcast, but it's not actually in the writing in the apps where it was, I wrote it down somewhere, but it mentions how the podcast is about cooking with edibles.
Yes.
And it has like the word cooking in it and things like that. Have you ever considered adding that title extension into the podcast name? Because that's the number one thing for search engine optimization, that people
Hmm.
like when people search for words related to marijuana, having something like a cannabis, the more words like cannabis, and especially what you're doing with it, like cook, the more words like
Right.
that you can include in the actual title of your podcast, the easier it is for people to find it, because that's how people will search for their podcast, as they put those couple keywords in. So you already have edibles down pat, but I think how great would it be that if someone's looking for like cooking with edibles or like cooking marijuana, and if they don't think to use the word edibles but they use like cooking cannabis, to make sure that you're
Hmm.
still the first one that shows up no matter what they're like we're related to, because you're putting more words from what your show is about into the title.
Right. Now, I think I've done that on my podcast host, like the platform there, because I think they
Mm-hmm.
have a spot where you can add title extensions.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my only concern is that it starts to get really long because
Mm-hmm.
finding the show about edibles is already pretty long for a podcast title sometimes. But
Mm-hmm.
I do understand what you're saying, and you're saying there's a way I could do that for the web part of things as well.
Correct, because even Adam's show, he introduces this podcasting business school, but if you look in the app, there's a whole other sentence afterwards. And even with my show, Podcasting Badass, it's Podcasting Badass, like podcasting tips and mindset tricks. It's longer afterwards, but that's not how I
Right.
talk about my show. You don't have to change the verbiage, the way you think about the show, the way you talk about it with your listeners. Your show still will have the same name. It's really just adding what it's about afterwards, so that it's easier for those people that are looking for the content to be able to find you.
Okay. Yeah, I like that.
So that would be the very first kind of search engine optimization 101, is think about the keywords in your keyword bank that are related to the content that you're doing, like seeing that it's about cooking, maybe throw recipes in there, so that when they see it, it's like, or if they're searching, that you're more likely to show up higher and higher, the more words will make you pop up.
Okay.
Yeah, and that can also, it's a very similar idea, what can translate then to your show description. I know that when I first learned about like updating and optimizing the show description, I was like, I haven't touched that since I launched my podcast 3 years ago. But
Right.
the top three things for organic discoverability that are kind of the backbone for making sure that people can find you no matter what they're searching for in your genre is like the podcast name, the cover art, which we'll get into, and then the show description. And the show description is one that a lot of times once you set it up, you kind of forget about it. But it's really been helpful for me just updating those three things with my podcast that I had been doing for 3 years on sobriety. Like my numbers, I got a 50% increase in my downloads within the next week, because people were finding it easier, because I
Okay.
added the title extension that was a little more specific about what it was about, with like other words that people might search for. So rather than just like having, for mine, it was like rather than just having queer, I also added LGBTQ, and like all of a sudden more people can find it. So like you might think because you're using like edibles and cannabis, but having something in the show description, like using other words like marijuana, there's so many words for marijuana. I remember that, like
Hmm.
try and in that show description have as many different words related to the topic as you can. I like to kind of frame it as the first 3 or 4 short paragraphs should be outlining what the podcast is about by using them. So,
Hmm.
for instance, Bite Me, the show about edibles, is a podcast about, and then a whole bunch of keywords. These are the type of episodes we have, that you have your solo episodes where you have recipes and like do all the keyword recipes about what those topics are about. And I have guests from industries like, and then mention like some of the big places that you've had or guests that you've talked to before, so that those names and those companies and those things are showing up as like little feathers in your cap. And then go into like, that's what the first couple of paragraphs should be about, is trying to include keywords and things that will pop up when people are searching for things in your industry. And then you can then flip the script and kind of using those same keywords, reframe it as questions, being like, each week we help the stoner, the hungry stoner figure out things like, what am I going to eat tonight? And you can get kind of cheeky with it, but while you're doing it kind of with those questions, that can help with people who are searching for podcasts through players like YouTube, where they search a little bit differently than they'll search in Apple Podcasts. Because
Hmm.
I'm sure as a podcast person, and I know that you said in your show that you listen to other podcasts, the way that you'll search for a show is very much like using the topic, using the keyword, while a lot of times if you're Googling, it's like, what is this? How is
Yes.
this?
Yeah.
How can I figure this out? So by having the first half be the keywords that will work for the podcasting players, and then having the questions on the second half, like the top 10 questions that will help you with the search engine optimization for the internet and for players like YouTube, that'll be a huge boon to what you're able to accomplish with your discoverability and how people can find you, I would think.
Yeah, I'll definitely have a look at that because it's probably been a while since I've looked at the description, and I should probably make sure it's similar across platforms.
Mm-hmm.
So I have consistent messaging.
Yeah, and I love with Buzzsprout like how quickly once you do it, they'll update in all of
Yeah.
their apps, but then it's like then you got to do the social media, and then you have to do this and
Yes.
that and the other,
Yeah.
all the other things that aren't as connected and as embedded. One day Buzzsprout will just be connected to everything, and everything will be
Yes.
automatic. But I feel like that was a huge help with those two things. Plus, like I mentioned, the cover art, which is always the sensitive topic for people. So,
Yeah.
what do you like about your cover art, or would you like me to start with what I like about it?
I mean, I've changed it probably
Mm-hmm.
a little while ago. I can't remember how long ago, but
Mm-hmm.
before I felt like it was maybe a little more cluttered, and now it just
Mm-hmm.
feels like kind of clean lines
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
fresh looking, I guess.
I do love the solid white background is like mwah, chef's kiss, and it
Yeah.
is the lines are cleaner. Like I mean I don't know what it was before, but I could say the lines are clean. And the only thing that I was concerned about a little bit was like the font size,
Mm,
especially like near the bottom, because it's great if you're searching for podcasts on your computer or like where they show up larger, you see them larger, and even a lot of social media apps and everything. But when you're looking in the podcasting app and you're remembering that it's on a small phone to begin with, and then you have
right.
the 6 or 7 that I love that. I want my eyes were immediately drawn to yours pretty much like wherever it was in the queue because it is in a very aesthetically pleasing cover art. I was like, and I was thinking before, and I was like, I hope that there's a bite out of something because of the title. There better be a
There
cannabis leaf
is.
like somewhere in there. So like every preconceived notion that I had hoped would be in your cover art was there. So like again, like you have a great base for
Thank
it,
you.
but I would think about like reworking it just a little bit to have that like it'd be a little bit clearer with the fonts. I'm trying to
So
pull it
make
in.
especially I suppose the title extension, like you said, because I know that's in the cover art.
Mm-hmm.
And you are correct because I find I do work a lot on my laptop and then I
Okay.
forget that most of the time it's a mobile experience and I should
Mm-hmm.
probably, you're probably right that the font's illegible for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people, myself included if I took my glasses off. So
I mean, I had to pay good money to fix my eyes so that I could be able to
yeah,
see it without my corrective lenses and everything
yeah,
like that, or else it would have been up here if I was looking
yeah.
at it. I love, and normally even like I've heard them say before, make sure straight, very clean. But I almost love how Bite Me is squiggly because it's a squiggly that is still very legible with the way that you
Hmm.
can read it. I don't have any question on like whether it's a T or an F. Like I know exactly what it is when I see it, and the coloring is great as well. Having it have like the pops of color. Yeah, I would just say again, just as I love the extension of helping cooks make great cannabis edibles at home. Maybe also include something about how you'll interview or like how you have other guests as well or something like that in interviews, but figure like you can play with your keyword bank and figure out what you want to
Hmm.
include in there and how to work that in, but definitely make it a little bit more legible. I would say that last line. And then also I know that you're looking about discoverability, but like in the end game result, I mean, I was wondering when I was going to hear you plug your cookbook when I was listening to. Is that like in the
Yeah.
plans in your future,
Um, I I
or
mean, I
like
use
a service or
it's
like
sort of like
something?
it's my lead magnet, so I should
Okay.
probably talk about it more, but my lead magnet for the email list that I have, but
hmm
you're right that I probably don't talk about it enough.
Okay. And I know that that's not what you signed up for us to talk about today, but
Yeah.
like I had to ask because like if you did like that'd be something that like next time I know like a stoner friend who doesn't listen to podcasts, like I would be like, oh well, how about this book? Or like, did you hear about this book? Or like it
Right.
I if you have things like that or like as your lead magnet, I would love to know at the somewhere in your episode what it is that you're talking about, and then like including that into things like your show notes as well, so that people can find it. But I
Okay.
mean, that's what we're all here for at the end of the day is to get something out of it, hopefully a little bit as well, even if it's just to kind of make ends meet or get a little bit more green in the end, hot green at the end. But I think that like you should be definitely adding that in somewhere because one thing that I learned at my last podcasting convention was at Podcast Evolutions in LA. was they were talking about like the way that people perceive podcasts compared to other forms of media. And what
Hmm.
I was really impressed with was how listeners almost expect to be sold something when they're listening to a podcast. And that, but like they look at it more favorably than any other form of radio. Like radio commercials, people will roll their eyes at. TV commercials and TV ads, any like even like YouTube watching videos, the pop-ups happen and people will roll their eyes. But for whatever reason, whatever magic right now in this little 2024's bubble that we're living in right now, when most of us listen to podcasts, if someone mentions that they're a coach with a program or a cookbook or a product or something that they do on the side, like people not only understand, but a lot of the people that like listen to you week after week, you have this great relationship with them, especially with the way that you engage with your listeners, that I they're expecting it or they're hoping for it. I would say that like if I, as a sober person who wouldn't personally be buying your cookbook, was interested in if it existed, that there's
Yeah,
for sure if someone was like listening, because it's especially if they're listening to it while they're doing their routine, how great would it be that they're like, oh, I can just go to the website later, I can sign up for this, or I'll get it this way, or like
right.
that they know as they're listening that that's an option for them, because I wouldn't have gathered that listening to the episode.
Okay. Yeah. I'll have to talk more about that, not be so worried about that I'm selling people.
Yeah. I mean, tell
Yeah.
me about that. Do you want to tell me about that a little bit, where that comes from, or what you might think?
It's probably just, I mean, I feel like I'm always selling a little something, maybe not
Mm-hmm.
always, but like I have the cookbook and I have a journal and I have a club and I have like all these things. And I just don't want
Mm-hmm.
to overwhelm listeners with too much stuff at the end because I tend to talk about that stuff at the end of the show.
Yeah.
But
One bit of advice that like I got from Adam as well is like when you do things like that though, just like find the one that you really care about and passionate about now and like commit to it for 12 episodes, or
right.
sometimes there maybe 6 if it's weekly rather than bi-weekly, but make sure that if it's the same message for a consistent period of time, because we all need to hear the same thing over and over again and slowly to be brainwashed into the thing a lot of times too. But
Hmm.
consistent messaging matters the same way that consistent release times and everything like that you've already got down like matter. Like those, if they know every single week that they hear the same thing, like I had that thing when I switched from having my podcast be about like a passion or a hobby that like I just loved and could throw all my money at and get nothing in return, into kind of turning and having podcasts for business or podcasts for things like that like I was like every other week it was like, look at this thing, look at this thing, look at this thing that I'm offering. And that kind of caused jet like, that's not a cute look outside. But now that I'm able to say like, here's this thing that I'm offering for the next, and like that will be the thing that I talk about at the beginning and end of my episodes for the next 6 to 12 episodes, it
Now, I have
gains
a question
traction.
about that.
Mm-hmm.
Would it work better? Like, because I usually have like a blurb that I say at the end of the episode, but
Mm-hmm.
what's if I'm really wanting to focus in on a specific thing that I'm selling, would it work better at the end of the episode or as a dynamic post roll ad that I make myself? Because I can do that with Buzzsprout.
Yeah, the dynamic post-roll ad for sure, but also mention it in the beginning, like organically in those episodes as well,
Right.
because you want to make sure like they hear, because we all love it when people listen to 100% of our episodes.
Yeah.
But if we look at our
Yeah.
stats, our hearts break a little bit every time that we realize that that's not always the case for 100% of our listeners. And
Yeah.
so making sure that even if someone like near the end is like, oh, I got my recipe and I'm ready to go cook it and like get stoned and like doesn't listen to your outro or the post
Right.
thing, that they still at least heard it mentioned in the beginning. So I would say both.
Okay. Okay.
And then the great thing with the dynamic content then is that then it automatically gets included though in your show notes at the end. So you don't have to like
Yeah.
add it into the show notes. So that's a
Right.
little perk of Buzzsprout too.
Yeah.
So did you have any questions about anything that we reviewed?
I don't think so. I mean, the question about the dynamic ad, but
Mm-hmm.
that you just answered it. So I think I can go back and review those things, especially the font size. That's something I'll definitely look at because I know like you said, it's too small. So,
Mm-hmm.
and people might tune in if they're like, oh, this is what the show is about, instead of just seeing like a cookie with a bite out of it and a pot leaf somewhere. So, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
but do you have any other suggestions outside of social media? Because I find that social media is, so I have a love-hate relationship with it just
Mm-hmm.
because I was recently shadow banned. Now they've reinstated my account more fully, but it's just a matter of time before I get banned again, just because I don't know. It just depends on which way the wind is blowing.
Well, I mean, I heard in your, I listened to that episode as well as your number one when I think, but when you asked your listeners where they found you, it was from guesting another podcast. That's your answer is guest on more
Right.
podcasts.
Yeah, because I am a regular on another Sunday podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
And that one's yeah.
get on more podcasts. Like
Right.
find like, and especially like look in the Apple Podcasts or Spotify podcasts. Look at the ones that are in your rankings or when you show up, like they show up, and like cross pollinate. Like, as I'm sure you love having people on your podcast, have them on yours. I've had so much success collaborating with other queer and sober podcasts that have popped up since I started, even though I lucked out to be one of the first that like since then, like the more that we all grow together, because when someone listens to a podcast, they'll listen to 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 podcasts, and yours
Mm.
being very niche down, they might also be okay listening to one that's more general, but you find the one in general and say like you have these amazing recipes and this amazing following and everything like that. Podcasts are going to scoop you up to be a guest on their podcasts and their shows all over the place, especially the ones that say they're about anything pod. And then the people who are like, wow, recipes on all these episodes, like I'm going to go subscribe and follow and download because you're reaching your target audience
Hmm.
already right in. And it's not just you're reaching people who like edibles or people who use marijuana in one way, shape, or form, but you're also getting people who listen and love podcasts. So it's a
Right.
win-win. The more that you can possibly guest on other podcasts, you should. I always like the recommendations, like you should always be trying to get on like one podcast a week if you're really looking to grow your show rapidly and aggressive, like not aggressively, because I hate the word aggressive coming from me like as a
Yeah.
man in 2024, but like if you want to be very assertive with the way that you're looking to grow your show, the more that you can guess and not, like start there because those are like the easy low hanging fruit, but then like try and find ones that also offer something similar, like go on cooking shows to talk about, see if some of the top cooking podcasts might be willing and open to doing one about marijuana. If there's like for especially, I mean, last month we're 1 month behind, but like 420, like every year in
Hmm.
April, you should be trying to go on every single podcast that does cooking to do your 420 recipes. Is
Hmm.
like,
So sort of like adjacent podcasts, like
mhm.
subject wise, cooking,
Yeah,
not just cannabis podcasts, but cooking podcasts.
yeah. Do things
Yeah,
that are like
I like
similar or
that.
related where you might be able to capture not just the people already like in that specific demographic, but also get people that are like exploring other things. Like, yeah, the cooking is the one that came to mind because that's what you're doing with it. So like get on that or get onto science based shows about like the brain chemistry or whatever, like health, and like talk about the health benefits of cannabis. And for people that are against smoking it, that they can eat it. And here's some great recipes. Senior living is something that I come from a senior living background, but I know like if you were
Mhm.
looking for like senior care, senior aging, pain management would be a huge podcast term I would search, like that just came to mind, but like Google and look for pain management podcasts. It's again
Mhm.
something that pain management, you go to the doctor 9 out of 10 times, they're going to be telling you or offering you to get a prescription anyway for marijuana or to use it in some way, shape, or form. So get them as soon as like before they're even eating edibles or have been prescribed edibles, get them like when they're looking for pain solutions. And then they know that you can help them. And that way you're also helping people and doing the Lord's work.
Yeah, that I love. Yeah.
Exactly.
So would you have any, like, I love those suggestions and
Mhm.
I mean, I could do one, I have time to do one episode, like one guesting opportunity a week. Now,
Yeah.
I do have a couple coming up that I'm going to be on, but I always find it sort of hit and miss. But I
Hmm.
do receive people's emails when they're pitching me to have guests on, but
Yeah.
they're often working with somebody who's doing like the work for them. So I'm just doing everything myself. Do you have any advice for like some kind of pitch that someone might put out that they could do? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I have. I've drafted like my little like around different things that I do. Like I have right now what I'm sending out is pride stuff. I'm trying to do stuff for like sobriety for pride for June because June's next month. So
Hmm.
like as you create your strategy of like whatever is coming up in your pipeline, or if you know you have a guest coming up that you want to talk about, or a certain recipe that you love, or a time of year where it's a seasonal recipe, like that would be a great way I would feel to kind of like work that angle with it.
So just like draft an email
Draft
ahead
an
of
email and say
time.
like, hey, this holiday's coming up and
Right.
I have these great recipes for it that use cannabis. I would love to be on your podcast to talk about these themed recipes, and you can even give like 2 or 3 recipes you might already be spitballing that way. Like as I'm sure you know, if someone comes to you and says like, interview me about anything possible, you're like, oh no, I have to figure out what I'm going to interview you about
Yeah.
now. But if someone comes saying like, here's the A, B, and C thing that I'm willing to offer you, it makes it so much easier as a podcast host that like if this was like not marijuana and like you were like, I want to be on your podcast for XYZ, I'd be just like, I'd be like, sure, let's do A. And like I love it when people are like, I want to, when I do topic episodes, having people say I want to do this topic specifically rather than like, well, what do you want to talk about?
Right. So be specific,
Be specific
essentially.
and say, this is what I want to
Okay.
come on your show and talk about. That way the intention's there. They're already at that point being like, well, then I can just make that the episode title. How
Yeah.
easy will this be to already like, you're already offering them a done for you episode.
Right. Okay. I like that because I also find guesting is a lot of fun because you're connecting with another podcaster,
Mm-hmm.
sort of building your network a little bit. And then it's usually a lot less work for me
Yeah.
because
And
I
then like,
just show up and I talk and then they do all the rest of the stuff. So,
exactly. And like
yeah.
I've recently like really been very vocal about because I don't love social media, but I know that we have to kind of get involved. That when I do that, I also specifically would say, and please, anything that you do on Instagram, invite me to be a collaborator.
Right.
And like specifically ask, because if you don't ask, half the girls don't even know like what, sorry, gay people being like girls, but sorry, but half the people that like they don't even know what inviting to collaborate means on Instagram. So I've had to explain that to some podcast people, and I'm like, podcasters who don't
Right.
know about that, but it's awesome that I'm able to help them then figure that out, because then they're like, how did I not know this? This is so easy. And then it helps everyone because it's basically content for you already done for you. So just I would
Right.
say whenever you go on the shows, be very like vocal as well. Be like, and please do this and I'll do this for you. And this is how I can like the more you communicate, the easier the experience is with guesting and setting those what you can offer and how you can help on the back end too.
Right. Okay. I really like that suggestion. I think I'll put some more eggs in that basket and be more proactive, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
is the real key. Yeah.
Yeah, because then there'll be that random week where like that one episode like that you guessed it on a year ago, like people find it and find you through that. It's again evergreen content marketing for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
All right. Well, we are nearing the end of the half an hour, but I will make sure that any we can you can always email me later if you have other questions.
That sounds good. Thank you so much, Steve. I
All
really
right.
appreciate it.
Thank you.